My company develops wearable devices. I'm going to tell you in 25 minutes how to develop a wearable device and get it through the FDA. There'll be a few details omitted. I'd be happy to talk to you about those later. So I'm going to talk about the different measurements that people make on wearable devices, battery limitations, and then how you get around them, and data security, and then a bit about the FDA. So there are a lot of different devices being developed that are wearable. We've worked on most of these. So let's talk about some of the measurements. I'll talk about 8 different measurements you can make and the sensors. Body temperature seems like a very straightforward measurement, but typically you want to measure the core body temperature. And you're putting the device on the skin, and the skin is usually not at the body temperature. So how do you make that measurement? Well, under the arm or on the forehead is a pretty good place for that. Most wearable devices aren't on your forehead or under your arm. So one thing that you can do is use another sensor to find out what's going on. If you know that somebody's outside and not wearing a coat, probably not a good time to measure the temperature. But if they're inside and they've been active, their wrist is probably close to the core temperature, unless they've been too active and they're sweating. So you can measure the temperature of the environment, you can measure the skin's conductivity, and you can measure activity. And you can now and then get an accurate measurement of core body temperature even on a wrist-worn device. So software can go a long way to help you. The other thing to be careful of, the contact of the sensor to the body is very important. If you don't have good contact, you don't have good heat flow, and you don't have a good measurement. Motion, everybody's familiar with motion because it's used for step counts, but it does a lot of other things as well. You can measure gait, so you can determine a type of illness just from somebody's gait or their change in their gait, diagnose it. There are other motions you can detect. You can detect if somebody is standing, walking, or sitting, and believe it or not, you can do it with a device on your wrist or elsewhere. There are a lot of algorithms that have been developed by the manufacturers of these sensors that allow you to do this type of sensing, determining what's going on from a very simple motion sensor. And then you can also do dead reckoning, where with a 9-axis sensor, you have the acceleration, you have a gyroscope, and you have a magnetometer. And with that, you can determine what direction somebody's going, how far they're going. It doesn't tell you where you are initially, so you may need a GPS to tell you where you started. But then over time, it becomes inaccurate. But for short distances, it can tell you where you're going in what direction. Heart rate is another common parameter you want to measure. A common way to do that is with ECG electrodes. You can use just 2 electrodes and measure heart rate. It works great on the chest. It can even work on other parts of the body like the wrist. Another one that is more popular on extremities would be the pulse oximeter, which besides measuring oxygen measures the heart rate. And there are 2 types, and I'll cover that next. But the one that you're going to use on the wrist would be the reflective type, and it's commonly used for heart rate measurement. You can also measure heart rate with pressure. If you put your finger on your wrist, you can feel the pressure change. Well, you can use a sensor to do that. It's less common to do it that way, probably. So let's talk a little more about blood oxygen. The sensor, the pulse oximeter, as part of measuring the oxygen, is measuring the pulse. And there's 2 types. There's the transmissive, which passes infrared through your body, and it has to be small, like the finger, or it could be the ear. And that is the standard that's been used for decades. There's a new type, which is transmissive. It sends the infrared light into the body and looks at what's reflected. The amount that's reflected is quite small, so the accuracy isn't as good, but it works on virtually any place in the body. And the problem with accuracy is nobody's achieved what would be considered medical grade accuracy with a pulse oximeter with the reflective type. without calibration. And how are you going to calibrate it unless you have the transmissive type? So let's talk about ECG and EMG. ECG, measuring the full waveform, not just the heart rate, is typically done in a laboratory with about 12 leads. If you've gone to a medical provider, you can do it with 2 leads, and now it's even been done on the wrist with just 2 leads. So it's getting pretty good. The EMG is measuring muscles, that's electromyogram. A common application is to measure the motion of the fingers or the hand by measuring the muscles on your wrist or on your arm. One problem with the wearable is positioning. Since you've got all these muscles very close together, if you're off by a few millimeters, you'll get the wrong muscle. So you could place a mark on your arm that somebody, a professional put there, but if that washes off, that doesn't really good. So the biggest problem with doing EMG is positioning. EEG for electroencephalograph obviously can only be used on the head. You can't pick up that signal effectively anywhere else. But there are effective ways of doing that. Sensors that will pass little probes through your hair, even if you've got a lot of hair, and make a really good contact, and it's as easy as putting on a hat. So EEG can be done quite well, and for some applications you don't need very many electrodes. There are even toys that use measurements just on the temples. Respiration, another important parameter. The gold standard is a chest strap. You measure the expansion of the chest strap. Anywhere else is difficult to do. There's thoracic impedance, which is fairly new. You can measure the impedance, the electrical impedance of the chest. It changes as the chest expands and contracts. This would work for something that's put on the chest. Now, a lot of devices people want to put on the wrist. Thoracic impedance can theoretically be measured if you have a device on one wrist and you touch it with the other hand. Now you're measuring impedance through the arms and through the chest. Unfortunately, the arms get in the way. They make the impedance much harder to measure, and it hasn't been accurately done yet. You can measure the breathing rate some of the time with that technology. Blood pressure is difficult to measure any other way except, or to measure accurately, any way except with the cuff. Cuff on your arm is standard. You can also get a cuff on your wrist, but as a wrist-worn device, that's rather bulky. There's another technology, and that's the pulse transit time. You can measure when the heart beats with an ECG or heart rate detection with electrodes, and you can measure when the pulse arrives, for example, at an extremity like the wrist. And you can do that with a PPG, the pulse oximeter. The difference in time and the change in that difference in time relates to the blood pressure. It's a reasonably good accurate measurement, but it's not accurate enough for medical accuracy. So you'll either have to calibrate it frequently or only use it for rough indication. Measuring glucose is becoming quite easy now. There are patches that are worn that have microneedles, and the microneedles are not painful. You don't really notice them. The difficulty with them is they do need calibration. Once or twice a day, you still need to prick your finger to make a measurement, to check the calibration. But these are typically worn on the abdomen. And now you've got the pumps that are connected to these devices. So with a patch that's measuring glucose and a pump, you now have an external but wearable pancreas. Let's talk about limitations of batteries. Wearable devices are always faced with this issue. I want the battery to last a long time, and I want to use a lot of power. So if batteries had improved the way semiconductors do, you would have a battery the size of the head of a pin. It would drive your car, and it would cost a penny. We'll never get anywhere close to that. And the reason is that we're limited by chemical storage. I don't think we're going to have gasoline on a wearable device, so we're going to be less than that. Lithium batteries are on the order of 5 or 10 times less energy efficient, but they're safer. And the trade-off is safety and capacity. And everybody knows there are already issues with safety on lithium batteries. Nuclear energy is another option, but I don't think we'll see that on wearable devices. So I think that we may see improvements of a factor of 2 in several years. There's a lot of activity going on to improve batteries, but it's not going to be dramatic. So let's talk about what we do because we don't have improved batteries. Let's talk about the RF, the transmission of the data. This is a large source of power consumption. What everybody would like to do is transmit from that wearable device directly to the internet. That's number one. That's what your cell phone does. It transmits directly to the internet. But that battery is fairly large and it lasts only one day. The next choice is send that data to a gateway. It could be, this is the way Wi-Fi works. It goes to a gateway that then connects to the internet. Wi-Fi is lower power, but still moderate. What is typically done is you have a sensor like Bluetooth or Bluetooth low energy that connects to the cell phone that you're wearing. It only has to transmit a few feet. And that goes directly to the internet. And that's pretty much the standard today. In the future, we're going to see technologies, they exist, but they're not widely spread, which can send low power and low speed transmissions directly to the internet over several kilometers. Now, let's take a look at the power used by sensors. First, we've got the camera and the power used by illumination, if you need illumination. We're looking at hundreds of milliwatts. This is not very good for a wearable device. It works on a phone, but it sure doesn't work if you want to use it continuously. Next, we've got GPS. GPS at 20 milliwatts is moderate. You don't want to use that continuously and have it last, it's not going to last for days. Load cell measures weight. It's used in a scale. You can measure extension of a band, for example. Moderate power. And a pulse oximeter is also moderate power. So these devices, you can either have them recharged fairly often, or you can leave them off most of the time. You don't have to measure your oxygen level every second. You can measure maybe every 5 minutes or every hour and leave that device off. And then you can get a pulse oximeter to last for many days or even weeks. Now we get down here at the bottom to measuring heart rate or ECG. Now we're getting down to devices that can run continuously for a long time. The 9-axis motion sensor that I talked about, which can do dead reckoning. A microphone, depending upon the technology, there's different types. They can be very low power or moderate. Light intensity can be also very low power. The ultimate is the 3-axis accelerometer, which can be so small that you can leave it on continuously, and it takes about as much power as your wristwatch, which can last for a year or more. So the 3-axis accelerometer is often used as a device that's listening all the time, and if it sees movement, it can turn on the processor and other things and say, okay, was this movement important? If not, shut down and wait for a different movement. And that's another way to save power. Now let's talk about data security. This is important now because the FDA requires that you have security in that data that you're transmitting. And security doesn't mean just encrypt it and send it. You've got to know that the device that's sending the data is the right device. It's not some counterfeit device. It's got to be sending valid data. We've got to know that it went at the right time, it's the right data, and it's accurate. And then that data gets stored in the cloud. And we've all seen that cloud storage can get disrupted from time to time and get stolen. You're dealing with patient data, so you have HIPAA to deal with. Even though it's encrypted, when you go and look at it, you have to decrypt it. And in that process, there's an opportunity for somebody to steal that data. Another important place to deal with security is if you have a device that's updated over the air. It's very common to send new software over the air to update a device. If I can do that, somebody else can do that. That device has to know that that update is coming from the right place. So to deal with these issues, fortunately, you don't have to develop everything from scratch. Companies have various parts of this available. Secure RF has a very low power encryption. It'll run on a very small processor, which, when you have a small battery, is very important. Most encryption is quite power hungry. Intrinsic ID has technology that's built into semiconductors, such as processors, microprocessors. And instead of putting a key into the chip during manufacturing, the chip already has a built-in key that you don't have to put in. The advantage is that if you're developing a device, say, and manufacturing it in China, and you put the key into the device in China, you might notice that there's a place for somebody to disrupt your security. They can put in a fake key. Secure Push has end-to-end solution that goes from system on a chip all the way to mobile app and cloud. So there are some good opportunities to do security without developing at all. And now we'll take a look at what the FDA has to say about these wearable devices. The FDA has special guidelines for apps on cell phones. You can help people self-manage their disease. So you can send data, like there's a cell phone app that will measure heart rate data, and you can send it, help you manage your disease, and that's not a medical device. You can also help patients work with their doctors, so they can collect some data, send it to the doctor, and it's not a medical device. Keep in mind, this is for a cell phone app. If that app is collecting data from a sensor that's a wearable device, these don't apply. In that case, that device needs to meet all the standards of any other medical device. So you may be familiar that the FDA has given us this leniency on apps, but it doesn't apply to wearable device, unfortunately. So I've left time for questions. Anybody have questions about electronics or wearable devices?
John. Mike.
What Walt doesn't know, because I never told him, you're actually the first speaker I chose for this program. Because I read a presentation that you had online about how to do a wearable device, and it is so topical right now. So thank you for unwittingly helping me shape this program.
Thank you.
Do we have a question for Walt? Is anyone here working on, well, I know, is Nursey here? You're here. Did you pick up, so Nursey is our keynote speaker. You'll get to hear him at 5:15. And he makes wearable sensors. I'm wondering, is there something here that clicked or sounds new or incremental to what you're doing?
Well, thank you for the great presentation. I think it was right on the money. So thank you for making the presentation, and particularly on the security and the authentication on those matters, because a lot of people don't pay attention to those until it's too late. So thank you.
Thank you, Nursey. Yep. Thank you.
I'm Linda Montana, Community Health Focus. I'm just curious if there's any work or any standard set for using wearable device data and including it in like a personal health record, something that is in the future going to be part of probably every patient's background.
There are many devices that are collecting data that does get put into personal health records. Yeah, that's happening a lot. And there's been a lot happening that's helping in that area.
Are the wearables part of that at this point?
Yes. In fact, our keynote speaker is going to be talking about that later this evening. Did you have a particular question or just in general?
Well, I just was curious about the FDA and the rules regarding that. Are they more open or are they being more restrictive?
So the FDA, the rules are the same whether it's personal data or not. HIPAA is obviously involved for personal data. And if you're sending the data along with the personal identification, then you've got to be careful about HIPAA. And you also have to be careful when you're storing it.
Hi, my name is Wearable. I'm the co-founder of a medical device startup in New York. I have a question about when your device has a core electromechanical component and on your roadmap you have further additions in the future. Are there better strategies to go through your FDA clearances? I mean, can you sort of eliminate certain pieces that are probably not core to the product and then at least get the product approved? I mean, is that something that medical devices manufacturers do?
So you want to know about simplifying the device to get it through approval easier?
Yes.
I would certainly recommend to remove anything that's not essential. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Like you'll be around tonight for the reception?
Yeah.
And be sure to catch up with him then.
Okay.
Walt Maclay, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Walt.